Good afternoon, good morning. How's everybody doing? How's the energy? All right, I don't know if I heard you. How's the energy? All right, that's more like it. First off, before we get started, besides asking people to turn their phones off, before we get started, I want to ask your permission. I want to show hands. I want to know if I have your permission to share things that are very difficult, very personal, and to be very vulnerable with you. Show of hands. Everybody okay with that? Okay. A couple other questions before we get started. How many people here have been divorced? Show of hands. How many people here have lost their jobs, been fired, laid off? Show of hands. It's happened to me 3 times, actually. How many people here have had health or mental health issues? Show of hands. Okay. The reality, folks, and I'm going to ask the Ryan to display the slides. Oh, there we go. There we have the slides. The reality is that all of us struggle. That's part of the human condition. That's what makes us who we are. That's what gets us to be the best version of ourselves. And the presentation today is not your typical success story. I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to tell you about fairy tales and unicorns, about making billions of dollars and buying Bugattis and yachts. It's not really my thing, to be honest. There's plenty of other people who do that. I'm going to share with you guys, I think, something far more valuable, which is the 5 pillars of resilience. How do you build resilience? Where does resilience come from? And can it actually be developed? You see, the truth is, over the next 6 years, the World Economic Forum has estimated that we're going to lose some 90 million jobs to artificial intelligence. 90 million jobs. Every single person in this room is going to be impacted by that. The technological tsunami that is coming is something that none of us have ever seen. And I can tell you that from personal experience because I worked in tech for 25 years. I was one of the early pioneers in mobile. I ran marketing with a skeleton crew of 6 crazy engineers in Lithuania rolling out the world's first app store in 2005, before the Apple App Store. I was there at the internet.com crash in 2000. Ran a startup back then too. And nothing that I have seen in the last 20 years has blown me away like artificial intelligence and the speed at which things are changing. That's just the truth. I'm not trying to scare or be overly melodramatic or anything. It's just the reality of what I see. And with the tools that I use today in my company, I'm able to do the work of 5 or 10 people. And that's not because I'm special or gifted or some genius. It's because the tools are really powerful. And they're easy to learn. And they are rolling out at a speed which is unbelievable. But there is, of course, some good news. We can all adapt to this new world if we're willing to step out of our comfort zones. But that's going to take a lot of effort. And it's going to be hard. And it's going to be uncomfortable. If you look at the world today, one of the biggest challenges that we have is that the vast majority of people who are working in our organizations, whether we're running a restaurant or we're running a $5,000 Fortune 500 company, or 50,000 people, is that people are scared. We're creatures of habit. We're used to doing something the same way. I mean, it's like, why do we always order the same latte? Why do we always take the same route to work? Because we're used to doing something and repeating it over and over and over, not questioning the way it's done. And one of the biggest challenges that we have today is simply the fact that the vast majority of people who are at work today, working for us in many cases, are disengaged. Right? Gallup estimates that over 70% of people at work are disengaged. Right? So one of the questions that we have to ask ourselves as leaders is, how do we change that dynamic? And change is hard. Because the reality is that whenever we have to change, we have to step out of our comfort zone and sometimes do something that's completely new. And when we have to do something that's totally new, that's scary. Right? Human beings essentially have two innate fears. You can boil it down to these two fears. One is the fear of being alone, not being loved. And the second is the fear of not mattering, not being significant. And therefore, in our subconscious, every time that we have to step out of our comfort zone and try something new, there's that risk of what? There's the risk of failure. And therefore, we think to ourselves, well, if I fail, am I going to be significant? How are people going to look at me if I don't succeed? So that means for many of us, we're going to have to develop a new muscle. We're going to have to develop resilience. Now, the good news is resilience is a muscle. Resilience is not something that some people are gifted with and other people don't have. Resilience is many different things, but first of all, it's our ability to bounce back from setbacks and failures. It is our ability to bounce back when things get really hard and when we're stressed. But the good news is that resilience isn't fixed. It's something that we can develop. There are ways, there are tools, there are techniques that we can practice in the same way that you go to the gym and you work out. The more you work out, the stronger you get. Now, granted, January 1st, we have those New Year's resolutions, and we go to the gym the first week. How do we feel after that? Yeah. We feel sore, right? We're like, oh, man, I can't even get up. I don't think I want to go tomorrow, right? But the more we do it, the stronger we get. On top of that, resilience isn't just our ability to withstand things. Resilience is also our ability to flourish and become a better version of ourselves. Because every time we go through that stress test, not only do we overcome that obstacle, we get better. We get better, and we get better, and we get better, and we get better. And this is why ultimately, if we really want to flourish and be the best version of ourselves, we have to do hard things. The signal, oh my God, that scares me. Oh, I don't know if I can do that. What if I fail? That is the moment of truth when you realize that's why I got to do it. Get to that next level. Okay? My plan today with you guys is really simple. My plan is to share 5 personal stories, each one that talks to a different pillar of resilience, to inspire you, to entertain you, because some of these stories are definitely entertaining, and hopefully to educate you. Leave you with some tools, leave you with some tips that you'll be able to use in your business, in your life. Okay? We good with that? Yeah. All right. Good stuff. So when we talk about resilience, one of the things that's amazing about resilience is that there's an element to it of neuroplasticity. And what does that mean? That means that whenever we try something hard, whenever we go through these periods of intense stress, our neurons, our brains literally rewire themselves. It's a crazy process. But that's why the more we do it, the more those neurons are firing, those synapses are firing, and that rewiring becomes more permanent. Right? That's one of the reasons why it's so important. They have studies now where they've shown that people that go through extreme trauma, right? Whether that's at war or at work, sometimes work and war can be very similar, right? We emerge stronger from that. So it's actually a good thing for us to do that, even though intuitively we do shy away from it because we have this innate need to protect ourselves. That's also why when you have to make a major decision, oftentimes the best people to ask for advice are not your parents. Sorry to the parents out there. I happen to be one. The best people you want to talk to is you want to talk to people who can give you independent, hard, neutral advice because they don't necessarily have your best interest at heart. They want to push you to be your best. And sometimes pushing us to be our best also puts us in danger. And that's what makes parenting so hard, right? So, the 5 pillars of resilience, at least in my life and in my experience, really are these. Well, we'll talk about each one of them. Purpose, values, human connection, our ability to reframe the situation that we're in, And last but not least, and it's not a coincidence that we are here in the house of God, is some faith. Anybody out there watch an Instagram channel called the School of Hard Knocks? Anybody? No? It's a really cool channel. I highly recommend it. The guy goes out and he interviews entrepreneurs all over the world. And one of the most interesting things that he sees is that, these guys all talk about their successes. And one of the things that they all mention, without exception, is their faith. Right? We'll come back to that. Let's talk about purpose. This first story starts in 2017. I can remember the date as if it was yesterday. It was March 6th, about 6 p.m. I was working as a chief marketing officer at Course Hero, a startup in Silicon Valley, which is a billion-dollar company, very successful. And the honest truth, folks, I was struggling. I've been a chief marketing officer 4 or 5 times in Silicon Valley. I know this job. I know technology. I know what it takes to scale and build a company at speed. But I was out of my depth on this one. And I was really, really having a hard time. And I was wrapping up my day, and every Monday I had a meeting with my boss, the chairman, founder, and CEO, 27-year-old super bright kid from Cornell. And we would sit down, we were talking about the business. I'd give him an update on what I was doing. And he sends me a message on my phone, and he's like, hey, man, instead of meeting in the open space near my office, do you mind if we meet in one of the conference rooms today? I was like, yeah, no problem. We'll meet in one of the conference rooms. So I grab my laptop and my phone, and I go to the conference room at the other end of the building, and I open the door. And in that conference room is my boss on one side of the table, and on the other side of the table is... dun, 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 the director of human resources. Yeah, we all know where this story goes. Okay, generally when you have a meeting with the CEO and the head of HR is there and it's not scheduled or announced, that is generally not a good thing. So I sat down and I closed the door, and something told me I wasn't going to really need to open my laptop for this meeting. So I left it closed. And I was looking at my boss, and his hand was under the table, his fingers were fidgeting, and I could tell he was really nervous, and he was looking down, he wasn't looking at me. And I felt like the air gets sucked out of the room, and a cold chill go down my spine. I know you guys who have been in this conversation are familiar with that feeling. And he and the director of HR looked at me and they said, look, we know things have been really challenging. It's been a struggle to kind of get the metrics right and hire the people that we needed. We know that obviously the company's also been in a challenging situation. But, we had a conversation with the board, and some members of the board have expressed concern with the way you've been running things in marketing and kind of like your shoot-from-the-hip attitude and the way you operate, because I'm a shoot-from-the-hip kind of guy. And unfortunately, we're not comfortable with some of the decisions that you've been making. And we regret to inform you that today will be your last day at the company. And right there, it's like that gut punch. And it's always hard. Those of you who have been through this know what it feels like. Because it's not about losing a job. It's about losing your sense of identity. It's about waking up the next morning and looking at your LinkedIn page and being like, okay, who the hell am I now? I'm certainly not CMO of this company anymore. Right? You all of a sudden have to do a reboot, reinvent yourself. And for me, folks, this was particularly difficult because a year and a half later, I'd had a fight with another founder in another startup, and that had ended very badly. And the year before that, my wife had left me. So I was on a roll. Downhill. It was not good. And so the next morning, I got up around 5 a.m. like I do usually, and I took my bike out because I'm a cyclist, so I go riding every morning. It helps clear my head. And I'm out there and I'm riding my bike, and it's cold as hell, and I've got so much emotion going through my head, and I'm angry, and I'm upset, and I'm scared. And I'm asking myself, what the heck am I going to do next? And I got my music blaring with my, EDM electronic dance music that I'm into, and I'm just pumping away on the pedals. And I don't notice a couple hundred feet in front of me a garbage truck that's pulling out into the middle of the street. And all of a sudden, the guy sees me, and he slams on the brakes, and he slams on his horn, and I see him, and I look up, and I am able to dodge, and I must have missed him by like 6 inches. And, he drives off kind of, swearing and saying something really nasty to me through the window. And I pulled over to the side of the road, and I put my bike against a tree, and my hands are shaking. And I had a thought which I hope none of you have ever had, and I hope I never have that again. And things were so bad for me at that point in my life that I thought to myself, what would happen if I had hit that truck head on at that speed? The single moment of searing pain, flesh and bone melding with steel, one brief moment of pain, no more startups, no more alimony, no more bills, no more stress. And that sat with me for a couple of minutes until I snapped out of it and I was like, I do not like this thought. This is not like me. This is not the kind of person that I am, and this is certainly not something I want to be thinking about. So I pulled out my phone and I made a phone call that I probably should have made years ago because people had been telling me this. Oh, and I was, at Google and some other places, people had been telling me for years, you should get a coach. And I was one of these, arrogant young guys, and I was like, coach, I went to a top business school. I work at Google. I'm a rock star. I don't need anybody coaching me. I pulled out the phone and I called this guy Jim, and I said, Jim, I'm really messed up, man. I was like, I do not know how I'm going to get out of this one. There's not a playbook for this. There's not a YouTube video for this. There's certainly not a TikTok for this. And I was like, I need some help. And so I started working with this coach. And I spent the next 9 months working with him. We would meet every week. And he would ask me a whole bunch of annoying, obnoxious, really difficult and challenging questions about my life and my values and why I existed and all this kind of stuff. And I struggled through that stuff. I read books, I went to seminars, all that stuff. It was like crawling out of a hole. That's what it felt like. Every single day, you're clawing away, you're trying to find your way out, and you start to get some answers here, and you start to get some clarity, and then you have other questions that you can't answer. But I can tell you that the most important process coming out of this work with Jim is that after 9 months, I discovered something that I felt I'd been looking for all my life. I discovered my reason for being. I discovered my purpose. I had never been able to figure that out, and I'd never really invested the time in figuring it out because we're all so busy, and it sounds like one of these ephemeral, crazy things to ask yourself. Why am I here? Why do I exist? Why does this actually matter? And there's a framework that I'll share with you that you can look it up. It's called the Ikigai, spelled Ikigai. And in Japanese, it stands for our reason for living. And the thing that helped me figure out my reason for living, my Ikigai, my purpose, was basically 4 things that I'll share with you now. First, what am I passionate about? People always talk about passion. What am I passionate about? What do I really feel strongly about doing? Second, what am I really good at doing? Because I can be passionate about playing the freaking banjo, but if I'm not good at it, I'm not going anywhere, am I? Right? You don't want to have me play banjo. That is a bad idea. Okay? Third, what can I get paid for doing? Right? Because obviously if I can't pay the rent, it's all academic. And lastly and importantly, what does the world need? The world doesn't need another $2 billion SaaS company helping us with process optimization. Bless the guys who do it. Great. I hope they make a lot of money. That does not excite me. It's not the kind of thing I'm going to be like singing in the shower about process optimization. There are people who do. Great, more power to them. That's not me. But when I went through this process with Jim, I found that I was passionate about helping others. I was passionate about helping people to be the best damn leaders that they could, be the best humans that they could. I found that I had talent for it because people are asking me stuff all the time, and people always need help. And I'm one of the few people who's actually willing to step on stage and talk about all the crap that I've been through as opposed to all the successes. Third, I know I can get paid for doing it because I work with some of the top people in the world, and they pay me damn good money to do it. And lastly, there sure as heck is a need. Because if you look around at the quality of our leadership, especially politically, not just in this country, but in my country, I'm Belgian, despite the American accent, we have a leadership deficit. We have a massive leadership problem in most countries. So when I found the intersection of those four things, I'm like, that's it. That's what I'm going to focus my time on. That is the reason I am on this planet. Right? So the first lesson in all this is that a clear purpose gives us direction. It gives meaning to our life. It gives us a reason to push on. And this is absolutely essential because when you are either a human being or and a leader, or whether you are a startup entrepreneur or you are running a business, when times get tough, which they will, you need to be able to fall back on something that has a greater meaning than just making a buck. And that's what I have found in every single successful company that I've come across. And the people that I coach, that I work with, I drill the hell out of them on this because I know things are going to get hard. And if they have a core reason why they're doing this, they have a 10x chance of being successful. And you don't need to believe me. There's a fantastic book on this called Exponential Organizations, written by some of the best venture capitalists on the planet. They studied for 20 years all the top companies in the world, including Google and a bunch of other people, and what is it that they find is one commonality? Massive transformational purpose. That is one of the things that sets those companies apart from others. Okay? Story number two. Story number two is from Silicon Valley to Chilican Valley. I just like the ring of that. I couldn't help myself. I'm a marketing guy. So I make this pivot to coaching, and I'm all excited because I found my purpose. And now I'm coaching, and I'm doing something that really gets me jazzed. And I'm starting to do this, and I'm coaching founders and entrepreneurs all over Silicon Valley, and it's great, it's hard, you know. I'm learning to be a coach. I'm going to school again at the tender age of 46 years old. That's kind of weird, but it's good. And I'm learning, and I'm growing. And then I get a phone call. And it's my ex-wife. And she goes, I need to see you. Don't want to generalize again, but when you get those kind of phone calls and Starbucks, and I need to see you, and it's soon, and I have to see you, and I was like, okay, let's go to Starbucks. So I meet my ex-wife for Starbucks. She buys me a latte. Okay. And we sit down, and she slides an envelope across the table, and I grab the envelope, and I open it, and it's a letter from her landlord. And the landlord says, we regret to inform you that we have decided to sell the house, and that unless you are willing to, pay the modicum sum of $2.4 million, you are going to have to move out in the next 60 days. And my wife, ex-wife, is freaking out. Totally understandable. And I look at her and I'm like, hey, don't worry about it. We're going to figure this out. I'll help you find another place. The kids won't even have to change schools. It's going to be fine. We'll work it. And she's like, yeah, I know it's going to be fine, and I know I'll find something else, but I don't want to live in Menlo Park anymore. And I'm like, hey, that's okay. We can find something in Palo Alto, or maybe we find something in the city. She's like, no, you don't understand. I don't want to live in California anymore. I'm like, Miami's nice. And she's like, no, you don't get it, Patrick. I don't see my parents anymore. I'm running a business now. I want to move back home. Only the problem is that my ex-wife is Chilean. That's like 8,000 miles away from California. And she's like, I want you to seriously consider leaving California. And then I'm like, okay, so I've just made this career pivot. I found my purpose. I'm starting to become a coach. I'm starting to build a business. And now you want me to move to the other end of the planet in a country that I don't know very well, in a foreign language, without any connections, and completely reinvent myself from scratch at 47 years old. Okay, not a problem. The answer is no. I am not going to frickin' Chile anytime soon, ever. And so we get into this dynamic where we can't make a decision because she really wants to move, I really want to stay. And I'm like, you're not taking my kids away from me. You're not moving to the other side of the planet with my kids. And I was stuck there. I couldn't make a decision. I couldn't get out of this new hole that I found myself in. And then my ex-wife did something brilliant, because she's a very smart woman. She has a lot of great qualities. She hired a mediator to help us work through this issue. And through the mediation and the fact that I was continuing to work with my coach, we were finally able to come to a decision. And the decision ultimately that I made, and this is a real picture taken in September of 2018, overlooking the Pacific Ocean, when I decided that I would leave Silicon Valley and that I would move to the other end of the planet, to this foreign country in a foreign language where I knew nobody, and I would start my career all over again. Now, why was I able to do that? I was able to do that because I relied on the second pillar of resilience, which is values. One of the things that I did with my coach, along with my purpose work, is I really dug into understanding what my values were, what really matters to me as a human being. And there's an exercise online that you can check out. It's very simple. You can go to thinktoperform.com/values, and you'll find there an exercise called value cards. It's a very simple exercise. And you start with 50 different values, and then you start kind of like picking the ones that resonate with you, and then it drills down and drills down and drills down, and until you have to drill down to 5. And that process is actually much harder than it sounds. It's simple to do, it's hard to execute. But through the work that I did with my coach, I was able to boil it down to 5 core values and define those core values very, very, very clearly. And one of those values is the good father. And so when I thought of going to Chile and how afraid I was at 47 to start all over again, in a new country, in a different language, with this new career, starting from scratch, with no network, I thought of those 2 little guys right there, who are now much bigger than that. And I was like, what would the good father do? The answer's pretty damn obvious. Good father moves to the other end of the earth to support his kids. So as terrified as I was, and I'll be honest, I was terrified, I did what I needed to do. I packed my stuff, I sold my car, I bid farewell to all my friends, and I embarked on this crazy journey. And I moved to Chile in 2018. And my parents thought I was absolutely insane. My father was so out of whack with all this stuff that he did 2 things, kind of characteristic, one not characteristic. One was he called and he threatened my ex-wife with all the vengeance of hell if she took my kids from me. He's like, you do not understand the legal ramifications of what I'm going to unleash on you. And the second thing he did, the first part was kind of obvious, the second one not so much, is he called my mom, who he hadn't spoken to in 20 years. He's like, this crazy guy's actually going to move to Chile at 47 and start over? And of course, she then called me. But the point is, guys, it was absolutely the right decision because of what's going to come next. The lesson here is a very simple one. when we know our values and we decide to live our values, we decide to live our life based on those values, two things happen. First, you're going to have to make some difficult decisions. You're going to have to do stuff that is hard. But the second thing is it significantly simplifies your life, because some of the toughest decisions that we need to make are sometimes much easier if they're aligned with our values. When you work in a way that is congruent with who you really want to be in this world, your life changes. You have integrity with yourself. You can look at yourself in the mirror and you can say, this is what I stand for. And you know what? I made a decision based on that today. And that, folks, changes everything. Story number 3. We now fast forward to 2018, and I had arrived in Chile. And I'm there as a sole entrepreneur, a coach, coaching founders in this new country. And I rapidly realized that as I start building this business, first of all, I'm really struggling to figure out what I'm doing, because although I've worked in startups, they've always been tech startups, not leadership development, and I've been a marketing CMO, not a coach. So there's a million things I don't know how to do. And I'm working by myself, and I don't know anybody, and I quickly realized that if I'm going to have any chance to make this work, I'm going to need a team. And so I start coaching these founders. I'm coaching Chilean entrepreneurs. Some of them bootstrapped, some of them, backed by VCs, some of them, scale-up businesses, all sorts of different sizes. And the business starts to actually take off because, how many people are there that have lived in 11 countries, done 30 moves, and worked at Google and worked in startups in Chile? Not very many. So I have kind of a small advantage. And all of a sudden, the projects start to get bigger and bigger and more ambitious. And as it starts to get out, as word starts to get out that there's this Silicon Valley crazy guy living in Santiago working with these founders, some bigger companies start to notice. And they're like, oh, this guy's interesting. He's not like the others. And they start calling me, and they start asking me for proposals. And then they're like, well, can you do leadership workshops for an extended team? And of course, like every entrepreneur, you're like, oh yeah, sure, I got no problem. Leave it with me. And you're like, what the hell did I just get myself into? Anybody ever do that as an entrepreneur? All the time. And so I start getting these ridiculous requests. But I'm so focused on helping others and serving that I'm just like, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I'm going to figure it out, dude. I'm going to figure it out. And so I start, reaching out through WhatsApp and other Facebook groups, and I start meeting other coaches, most of them Chilean, and I start networking with them, and they start helping me build these programs. And all of a sudden, I realize why I'm in Chile and why I'm doing this stuff, because I'm like, hey, I'm a pretty good sales and marketing guy. I don't have all the coaching stuff figured out, but I can actually hire these people who will figure that out for me, and then I do the sales marketing. And that's how my third company, Leap, was born. It's kind of born out of necessity, but it was also born out of the need to just reach my hand out and ask for help. Because the reality is I didn't know what I was doing. I was kind of figuring it out as I went along. And everything started to transform when I did that. All of a sudden, this thing that, I was working as a solo entrepreneur started to morph into a business. One day, one of the main people I want to talk about in this business is this gentleman right here. Wrong sides. The kid from Venezuela, Jose. One day I realized that I had so much work going on that I really needed somebody to help me out with a lot of the marketing, administrative, and CRM stuff. And I'm sitting there in my co-work at WeWork, and behind me is this charming woman. She's so professional, and she's well-spoken, and I hear her on the phone and stuff. She's working for another company, obviously. And I'm writing the job description for my first employee. And I turn around and I go, hey, I was eavesdropping. I was listening to you on the phone the other day, and you sound really smart. You have everything together. You're very organized, very professional. I was like, you wouldn't happen to have a twin sister or something, would you? And she's like, no, but she's like, my boyfriend is actually going to move to Chile in September. And I'm like, oh, cool. Can he do marketing? Can he do email? She's like, you should talk to him. So I hop on a Zoom call. I meet Jose. And how much experience do you think Jose had with CRM? 0. How much experience do you think Jose had with content marketing? Zip. How much experience do you think he had with email marketing? Nada. Jose had no experience in anything. But what he did have is he had the right values. You see, one of the first things I did when I built that company, which I had not done before, which I also recommend every entrepreneur do, before you write your business plan, and you do all your modeling and all your spreadsheets and all that stuff that they tell you in business school, so important, because it is, but it's secondary, is your culture deck. It's your culture deck. What's the purpose of this business? Who are we serving? Why are we serving them? How are we different? What are our values? What do we stand for as a business? Simon Sinek once said it, and he said it great, so I'll just steal it from him. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. I was not the first leadership development company in Santiago. Hell, I was probably the 50th. But when people would go to our website, they would read our values, they would read our purpose, and they would read my story, they would be like, this guy has a reason why he's doing this. He's really into this. And when I interviewed Jose, and I asked these interview questions that were specifically tailored to the values of my company, I realized that Jose was humble. Jose had a growth mindset. Jose was hungry. And Jose was smart. And I don't mean smart in terms of IQ. I mean smart in terms of EQ. That's why I hired Jose. But the other thing that was amazing with Jose is that even though he was so much younger than me, he became my thought partner. When I was having a bad day in the office, I would share things with Jose. I would ask for his advice. He was a smart kid. And I mentored him, and I taught him all these things about marketing. And in the span of a couple of years, we built a fantastic business. Not just him, but a whole bunch of other people that we subsequently hired. Hired them based on values. Hired them based on their ability to bring value in the business, not just in skills, but on abilities and on passion and on purpose. And when times got really, really hard, which they will as I get into the next story, Jose was one of the guys that stood by me through thick and thin. He was always there. He edited 70-plus videos to populate our YouTube channel. We created videos that were some of the most watched videos in Latin America on leadership development. My video on the 12 characteristics of leadership was the most watched video on leadership in South America from a gringo who had arrived in Chile with no money and knew nobody 2 years earlier. Jose was the one who made that happen. We developed one of the biggest databases of HR professionals in South America. Jose was the guy who made that happen. We had content that was like seen as some of the best content on leadership development in South America. Jose was the guy who made that happen. We did webinars and stuff before anybody knew what the hell webinars were all about. Jose was the guy who made that happen. I could never have built that business without this 25-year-old kid. And I will be eternally grateful for what he did. For me, for the business. But also for something else, which is most of us struggle to ask for help. Raise your hand if you can look back at some moment in your life in retrospect and realize you should have asked for help and you didn't. Every single person should have their hand raised. We've all been there. And the reality is that there's neuroscience behind this. There's basically a couple reasons why we don't ask for help when we need it. First, we're wired to protect ourselves and never be vulnerable. Society has preconditioned us, particularly men, sadly, to not show weakness, to not be vulnerable, to not say, I don't know. So instinctively, when we know we need to ask for help and we want to ask for help, we're like, oh my God, I got to be vulnerable. No vulnerable. No. Right? The second thing is we don't want to be judged. Right? We think, oh my God, what are they going to think about me if I ask? Are they going to think that even though I went to this school or that school, or studied, worked at this company, that I'm not capable of? I'm not capable of doing this? I'm not worthy? Because remember what I talked about is we all crave significance in some way or other. So the minute we have to start asking for help, we're wondering, oh no, I'm going to get judged. Third is social norms. We are constantly bombarded by stuff on YouTube and Gary Vee and all these guys on TikTok and on Instagram who are telling us, you got to grind through. Let me tell you, that is not true and it is not intelligent. The best people that I coach, one of the first things they do is they get a great team in place of people who compliment them on the things that they are not good at. And they are very self-aware about that. And a coach really helps you build that self-awareness. When you know that you are a disaster in accounting and finance, guess what? You get a good accounting and finance person. You ask for help when you need it. You don't go, I'll just chat GPT it. No, dude, don't chat GPT it, okay? You're a marketing guy. Don't chat GPT finance, okay? That's like a finance guy trying to chat GPT HR. Bad idea, right? So when I learned to ask for help, my life changed. And so we were able to build a company in 2 years. In 2 years, that became one of the most successful leadership development companies in Chile. We built a brand in a sector that usually doesn't have brands. And people were like, how the hell did this guy do it? And it was not because I was a rocket scientist. It was because I did things differently, I hired great people, I built a brand, and I asked for help all the time. And it's not just about asking for help from friends or from coworkers. It's also your indirect channels of support. What do I mean by that? Your men's group, for those of you guys who are part of a men's group, or your women's group, for those of you who are women. Your church group, for those of you who go to church. Your basketball team, if you play competitive sports, right? There are many different support networks that we need to rely on, including friends, including family, including coworkers, informal groups, mentors, and coaches. Make sure that you have that entire support structure, okay? That's what it should look like. You should make sure that you have reliable people in each one of those quadrants that you can rely on all the time. And preferably, you have fixed meetings throughout your week to meet with those people, right? Just like you meet with your board or your sales team or your marketing team or whatever. You're meeting with your mentors. You're meeting with your church team. You're meeting with your basketball team. And you can get advice from many different sources. The point is, get advice. Be humble. Ask for help. Okay? So, the third lesson, of course, part of our resilience is our ability to drive and nurture our human connections. And that is a deliberate decision. One of the reasons that my relationship with Jose was so successful was not just because he helped me, both psychologically and in terms of his abilities. But the most magical thing about asking for help, guys, I'll turn it around and ask you as a question. How do you feel when somebody asks you for help and you help them? How does that make you feel? It makes us feel good, right? It makes us feel great. So the other thing that's such a cool added bonus of asking for help is not only do we solve our problem, we actually make somebody else feel better in the process. That's what's magical. Our fourth story. Trying hard things is absolutely necessary for us to grow, to become a better version of ourselves, to become better leaders. And through better leaders, we become better human beings. But the reality is, sometimes you're going to leap and you're not going to make it. This was an interview they did for me in the Diario Financiero, which is the equivalent of the Wall Street Journal in Chile. It's the country's major financial paper. And a couple of months before I left Chile, one of the reporters interviewed me about what it had been like to live and work and start a business in Chile. And the title there is, Mis 4 años y medio en Chile fueron los más difíciles de mi vida. The 4.5 years in Chile were the hardest in my life. I will not sugarcoat it by telling you that those 4.5 years, I went through my own personal version of hell. during those years. For starters, and this is a real picture that I took with my cell phone, a year after my business started to take off, what started as a small student protest movement from college students for bus fare hikes turned into a full-blown massive civil uprising across the country. Things got so bad that they rolled out police, tanks, armored personnel carriers, and I found myself in a country under martial law. As you can tell, when you're in a country under martial law and people are out looting and burning supermarkets and you're selling leadership development and coaching, it doesn't really work real well. My budgets and everything went to zero. I went from great growth to nothing. It was like COVID. And we barely survived. And it was quite an ordeal. And I remember stepping outside of my apartment one day to walk my French Bulldog, Max, and I walk out of my apartment, and the streets are completely deserted. I'm like, wow, that's strange. There's like nobody on the streets. I'm like, come on, Max, you do your stuff. And the doorman of my building is like, Señor Patrick, toque de queda. I'm like, dude, I have no idea what the hell you just said, but whatever. I'll be right back. And I'm like walking around the block, with my dog, with Max, and I'm like really noticing that there is absolutely nobody. And I live on a major thoroughfare. And I'm like, toque de queda? I wonder what the hell that means. So I take my phone out, hey, Google, what's toque de queda? And Google's like, oh, that's a Chilean term, used from the 1970 revolution under Pinochet, and that means, martial law, and you could get arrested and shot. And I'm like, Max, we're going home. We were under martial law. I was not even supposed to be outside. I could have been arrested, right? But the impact on my business was catastrophic. Catastrophic. But we made it through that. And we started to grow again. And then, of course, in 2020, what happened? Yeah. Only in Chile, I don't know about Florida. I've heard stories. You guys had it really good. In Chile, we were literally under house arrest for 6 months. For 6 months, I was not allowed to leave my house. Nobody in the country could leave their houses. I needed to have a special permit to take Max out for a walk, which of course I abused infinitely. But I couldn't leave, right? So we have a civil unrest, my business nearly tanks, then we survive, we start getting okay, and then COVID hits. And then, of course, everything goes to zero. The country, the world comes to a standstill, right? And things just go to zero. But then 2021 rolls around, we somehow survive, I don't know how. I guess that's when I started to become a religious person, because it probably was a miracle. And then, of course, after that, Chile goes into a massive, once-in-a-lifetime economic recession in 2022, just as we're starting to bounce back. Like the country just completely tanks. And to make it worse, I'm in the middle of building a technology platform. I have engineers I need to pay. I'm trying to raise money, and the market in April of 22 completely craters. Completely craters. And I'll never forget a coaching session that I had with my coach in the days that follow that. I was in such a bad place again. I was just angry with the world. I was like, how is this happening to me? How am I not getting a break? The universe is trying to send me a message or something. I don't know. But my coach turns around in this coaching session and she goes, Patrick, if you can't take care of yourself, how are you going to take care of others? And that question just floored me. Because for years, I'd just been giving and giving and giving and giving. I was there for my kids. I was there for my employees. I was there for my coaches. My salespeople were making 3 times more money than I was, and I was happy and I was excited for them. My clients were doing great because we were doing such powerful work. We'd coached 10,000 people across Latin America. We'd won all these awards. I built this business, I built this brand. and I was dying. I was dying. Physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And I remember about a month after that coaching conversation, I went to a business school reunion in France. And at one of those reunions, a very good friend of mine was there who also happened to be one of my investors. His name is Ajit Sanchetti. He's Senior Vice President at CrowdStrike, which is a very successful cybersecurity company in the Valley. Serial entrepreneur, great guy. And he looked at me and he said, dude, excuse my French, you just look like stir-fried shit. You look terrible. It's like, I am legit really worried for you. You cannot keep this up. He's like, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know who you feel you owe, why you've nailed yourself to this cross. Like, what are you doing? It's like, you don't need to go out and prove this to anybody. It's like, but if you don't get out of this spiral, if you don't make a significant change in your life, I'm really worried about what's going to happen to you. And my father and my parents called me and said the same thing. They're like, bro, it is time to cut your losses. And it was one of the hardest things I have ever had to do. And in May of 2023, I got on a call. And I told my coaches and I told my staff, we're going to shut down. We're done. One of the toughest things I've ever had to do. You know, when you build a business, especially something that's very purpose-driven, you put your heart and soul into that business. There's a passion, there's a commitment that goes into it. It's very tough to let go. And my coaches were devastated. Because we'd been a source of business for them for years. A source of inspiration. But, you know, I'd made this decision that despite all the great work that we did, I needed to move forward. I needed to move on with my life. I needed to give myself oxygen. It's like, you know, being in an airplane. They always tell you to put your mask on before you put the mask on the kids, right? I was dying for oxygen. And I learned a really valuable lesson. There's no such thing as failure. Only learning. If I had not gone to Chile, I would never have started that business. I would never have hired Jose. I would never have impacted 10,000 people across Latin America. I would never have created content that impacted millions of people across Latin America. I would never have written my best-selling book, Step Back and Leap, that chronicles all the crazy stuff that I've been through. And most importantly of all, I would never have become the father that I am today. Was it hard? Oh, yeah. Oh, it was hard. But it was so worth it. Because it is through struggle, and it is through going things that are incredibly hard, that we really find out what we're made of. That we're able to push through and be reborn and come out a better version of ourselves. Man, on top of that, that's what this country is all about. So, on a lighter note, let's talk about the last pillar. When I moved back to the United States and started over again, I had to make a number of pretty big decisions. And one of the decisions that I had to make, you know, in this new era of Miami, was what I was going to do. You know, was I going to continue in leadership development? How was I going to do it? How was I going to continue to honor my purpose and my values in this new chapter? And one of the things that happened as well in Miami, which was quite a surprise to me, is that all of a sudden one day I get a phone call from my son. Everything always starts with a phone call, in case you didn't notice. I get a phone call from my son, and he goes, Dad, I don't want to finish high school in Chile. I want to actually graduate in the United States. As a matter of fact, I want to play D1 basketball in the United States. He was a really good basketball player. He had been invited to play on the national team in Chile and was ranked as one of the top players there. And so part of me was really excited to have him come live with me because I was like, wow, this is cool. It's my son, it's my little man. And he's going to come live with me in Miami. And then he moved to Miami, and then the realities of being a single parent in Miami with an 18-year-old dawned on me. Oh boy. It was so much harder than I thought. And things started to come up in our relationship, which sometimes, for those of you who have been divorced and not necessarily live with your kids, when you see your kids every other week or every week, it's not the same as living with them. You can do a lot, but it's not the same. And we started to get into some really serious arguments. Not just about politics, because, we're coming on the election year, but we had differences of opinions there, but about much deeper stuff. And through some of these conversations, some things came up that he said to me that I really hope none of you ever have to hear as parents. There was a lot of anger pent up in this kid. And there was a lot of judgment, and there was a lot of blame. And through some very heated conversations where he was so angry that he was shaking, the truth finally came out about what he thought about me as a father, as a husband, as a, in his eyes, failed businessman. I made it very, very tough. And we got into such heated debates, and it was so vicious at times, some of the things that he said, that I would have to leave the apartment and just go calm down somewhere. And at one point, after several months of this, I called up his mom and I said, I don't know if this is going to work. The level of disrespect, the anger and the hatred that he has, I'm worried that something bad's going to happen. And as a coach, I'm going to share one more tool with you guys, which I think you're going to really like. It's called the Wheel of Life. One of the first things that you learn to do when you work with people as a mentor or as a coach is you give them a tool called the Wheel of Life. And the Wheel of Life predictably looks like a wheel, and it has 8 different spokes. And what we do with leaders is we look at their lives as a wheel, and we ask them to analyze each one of these spokes on a scale of 1 to 10. And the spokes are, for example, wealth, career, friendships, marital and love life, community, spirituality, and there's one more which escapes me right now. But the point is, most of us, particularly in this country, have a tendency to really focus the vast majority of our attention and energy on only 2 of those spokes: our money and our career. And then we wonder why we have a major, major problem in our lives when money and career are not going well, because we haven't managed the other spokes and the wheel is completely bent out of shape and looks like hell. And so one of the things that I noticed looking at my own wheel was that there was a gaping hole that I had neglected for over 40 years. And that had been, as I got older, pulling at me. And that was spirituality. I felt empty. I felt nothing inside. And I remember I was walking down Lincoln Road one day, and I came across this beautiful church. It's old 19th century, kind of like Spanish, Mexican-style church. And it was gorgeous. And as, a fan of history and somebody who had lived in Mexico and lived in Latin America many years, I was drawn by it. But not just because of the architecture, I was drawn by something. And I went in, and I sat down, and I just stayed there for a while, soaking in the serenity, the quiet. And I decided I would go back on Sunday to Mass. And this was really hard for me because, I had not been into a church or been to Mass in 40 years. Not only that, I'd studied history and diplomacy at Georgetown where, when you study the religious wars, let's face it, it's not real flattering for many organized religions, to put it mildly. And so for a long time, I was somewhat anti-religious. I wouldn't say I was an atheist. I believed in something, but I would say I was heavily agnostic. But I knew that there was something missing in my life. And that day in church changed everything. The choir, the people greeting each other and giving hugs, the sermon from the pastor, the happiness, the joy, the kindness. I hadn't experienced any of that. It was like I was overwhelmed with emotion. I was sitting there and, listening to the pastor, and I was like tearing up, and I was thinking of all this stuff. And the weird thing was I thought it would pass. And I went back week after week after week after week after week. And I kept getting the same emotion. Until one day I made a conscious or unconscious decision, and I decided, you know what, I'm just going to let go. I'm going to surrender. I'm going to let go, and I'm going to realize that there are things I can't control. I'm going to let go, and I'm going to surrender. I'm going to realize that there are things above me, there are things happening above me that I cannot control, that I cannot see. I'm going to decide to surrender to a power greater than myself. And the weirdest thing about that is that my life completely changed, including my relationship with my little man. There was all of a sudden like a zenness to me, a tranquility, a calmness, a confidence. My business started to completely take off. My speaking completely took off. My relationships completely took off. My confidence completely took off. It was like the one piece of the puzzle that was missing was that. The thing that I had been looking for was right there in front of me the whole time. And so for me, stepping inside that church, that's the inside during one of the ceremonies, seeing these church people, the choir singing, seeing people listen to the Psalms, greeting each other, all that had a massive effect on me, not just because I felt spiritual for the first time in so many years, but because I made this conscious decision to let go and surrender. And I realized that I couldn't control everything, and that there were certain things that were going to be guided by a higher power, a higher purpose than me. And my son started to see that in me, and we started to have very interesting conversations about it. And I learned that in his own way, he was very spiritual as well. And then he started showing me the videos from the School of Hard Knocks on Instagram of all these successful people who were successful not just financially, not just in terms of building businesses, but they were successful because they were balanced. And that's the thing that we don't have in our society today, guys. It's balance. We have this obsession with buying stuff that we don't need to impress people that we don't know with money that we don't have. And it's killing us. Because when you focus on balance, when you can get your bicycle wheel to a stage where basically you have great friendships, you have great health, you have wealth, you have a good career, you have meaning and purpose in your life, you have a great partner, you have a great community, you're spiritual, that is success. And the most successful people in life know this, and they nurture it. And that's the biggest thing that's changed for me the last 2 years. And that's why I can tell you with all confidence that even though I might not be a billionaire or own a yacht, I don't need that, then I consider myself much more successful than those who do. Me personally. One of the most important things that this also taught me is that the key to my success and the key to my happiness is to do things that give me energy and avoid as much as possible the things that take energy from me. To do the things I really love doing. Being on stage with folks like you, doing workshops, doing coaching. That's the stuff that drives me. That's the stuff that gives me energy. That's the stuff that makes me who I am. And the more I do that, the more energy I get from it, the more energy I can give back to others. Because the thing that you also realize, which is so essential about resilience and our ability to reinvent ourselves, is we cannot reinvent ourselves if we do not have the energy to get back up when we get knocked down. It is not possible. Anybody here ever been to a Tony Robbins event? Okay. It's from last year. If you've been to a Tony Robbins event and you have been in a stadium jumping up and down for 3 days with 14,000 people who, by the way, are not on drugs, that's energy. And when you have that level of energy, you can do anything. All the success I've had comes from the combination of those pillars. Whether it's, inspiring young people at universities, that was me in Caracas. I went to Venezuela. They couldn't even afford to pay me as a speaker. They just paid my flight. And I went there because I thought, this is my calling. I'm just going to go to Venezuela. I'm going to go to Caracas. I'm going to inspire these kids because these people need entrepreneurs. And whether it's inspiring young people or whether it's writing a best-selling book or getting in the best shape of my life, because I can tell you, an 18-year-old who's a D1 player, he decides he's going to become your personal trainer, he will kick your ass until you are in that shape. I lost 10 pounds and 4% body fat in 3 weeks. All the success has come from those pillars. All the success comes from the resilience. And like I said, the resilience is something that every single person in this room can develop if you work at it. But it also requires us to focus on what matters, to look beyond the money and the career, to think about our friendships, to think about our loved ones, to think about our parents, to nurture those relationships. How many people in the audience here are fans of The Matrix or watch The Matrix? Raise your hands. Matrix? All right. The fifth lesson is that, when you're grateful and you have faith, there's no room for fear. The beautiful thing about faith and gratitude is they directly counteract fear, which is the thing that holds us back. But if you watch The Matrix, you'll remember that at the end of the day, every single one of you, every morning that you get up, has to make a decision. Are you going to choose to live with purpose or only chase money, fame, or career? Are you going to choose to live based on your values or take the easy path and make easier decisions because they're more comfortable? Are you going to choose to ask for help when you need it, knowing that not only will it make your life better and easier, but it will make the person helping you happier and feel significant? Are you going to choose to reframe your setbacks as an opportunity to learn and grow and do things that you know you might not succeed at doing, but because it will make you a better version of yourself? And lastly, are you going to surrender and trust your destiny in the power of someone greater? Each of you has to make this choice. I can't make it for you. All I can tell you is I've made my choices, and they've taken me to the place that I am today, to a happier place, to one of the best times in my life. In closing, the only thing I can tell you folks, the only certainty that I have from what I've experienced in 11 countries, 33 moves, 6 startups, and all the craziness that has been my life, my one absolute certainty beyond these pillars I shared with you is that life begins at the edge of your comfort zone. That's where it starts. Thank you so much. God bless.